In this video, I'm going to show you how to use the Quick Rig tool in Maya, which is part of the Human IK toolkit to rig this character that I've been working on in Maya and using Substance Painter. So I had exported this character using an FBX file out of Substance Painter and attached the substances as demonstrated in a previous video. Now what I'm going to do is set it up for rigging. Now I could go through the manual process to set up a rig for this character by setting up a skeleton and then adding controls and skinning the mesh. But the Human IK toolkit in Maya has some great capabilities that you can use to do this. Now, it's not a one-size-fits-all. However, if you're doing a human character with rather human characteristics, it works quite well. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm using the Human IK tab, which you can activate over here, or if it's already active and it's a tab over here on the right-hand side, you can select that tab. Now, you could go through and create the skeleton, create the control rig. There's manual controls to go through everything and create your custom rig, but there's this Quick Rig tool. There's a couple things I want to do first to make sure that everything is set before I use this Quick Rig tool. So the first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that I've deleted all my history. Now, since I brought this in as an FBX file, I opened up that FBX file in Maya and then I saved it back out as an MA file so that it's not still an FBX file, right? I'm going to need to save this as a Maya ASCII file. So the one thing that I want to do first is I'm going to go to Windows, I'm going to go to Settings, Preferences, and Preferences, and I'm going to confirm that it's set to meters because that's what I had originally set this up as. So I'm going to go to meter because what I'm doing is I'm modeling this character as if I were to use it in a game or animation. So I wanted to set it to meters because the working units that I wanted to use or I started with is in meters. So I'm going to go ahead and save those preferences. And then you'll kind of notice that the character is really small in this gigantic grid. And the reason why is because when it comes over as an FBX, technically it doesn't have a unit size, but it makes it this small. And if you come over here to the channel box, you'll notice that it could be this 0.01 on the scale X, Y, and Z. And I'm just going to set that back to 1. I'm dragging across all of them and setting them to 1. And now my character is full size again. So just something to check to make sure your character might be a little different if you're modeling it differently, but I want to make sure. The other thing that I want to make sure is that I've deleted all my history. So I'm going to go to Edit, Delete All by Type History. Now, once I start getting into rigging, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to delete all my history because you're going to get rid of a lot of extra things that you're going to be adding, especially like skin weights and all that. So after you're done with the modeling and texturing, I want to make sure that I delete all the history. The other thing that I want to make sure of, and you probably want to make sure you did this before you sent it to Substance Painter, but make sure you've merged all your vertices. And I just do this by right-clicking, going to Vertex, selecting the entire character, and I can use this button on my shelf, which is part of the poly modeling shelf. So I use this to merge all the verts. And when I do that, I want to make sure my threshold is set pretty low. So usually 0.0001, but 0.001 might work. So I'd already done this, so there shouldn't have been any difference, but I'm going to go ahead and right click, go back to object mode. Right now, I'm going to go down to the Human IK toolkit, and I'm going to go to the Quick Rig tool. And this is going to open up this window. The important part of this process is not to close this window until we're completely done. So it might hide in the background, but I want to just keep bringing it forward. So right now there's no character. Nothing should be showing up here other than none in terms of the character. And I don't want to do a one click. I'll show you what happens if I do a one click and I choose auto rig. It's going to process this. It's going to do all these different steps. And it's going to give me this Human IK. It's going to give me this skeleton. But the problem is you'll notice that the skeleton, its arms are down and the head is not right in the right spot and the hips are not in the right spot. So it's trying to guess where these parts are on my model. And my model is not very extremely typical. So it kind of guessed wrong. So I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm just going to go over here to the IK toolkit. And I'm going to go to definition and I'm going to press the little trash can icon. It's going to say, do you want to get rid of the current definitions? I'm going to say yes. And this was just an experiment. So I'm going to delete these things that were created by this Quick Rig tool, right? So Now I've got it back to that square one. That's why I don't want to use the one click, because it's not one size fits all. If it works, you can try it. If it works for your character, that's great. But there's a couple problems that I've noticed with it. So I'm going to go to the step by step. And when I do that, you're going to notice that, there's nothing really in this window that's kind of selected. When I select this, you've already see that it's added to this 3D geometry, but I need to click this little plus button to add a character, right? That little plus button's adding a character. It's calling it quick rig character, and I can edit that and I can delete that or whatever, but I'm going to hold on to it for now. I can always change that name later. Then I'm going to go in here, and you're just really going down this window step by step. So the first one is add the geometry. So I'm going to click this little plus button, and it's going to add that shape. If you have multiple shapes that make up your character, like eyes, or you've separated your hands, or you've separated your legs, or whatever, you can add each piece of that geometry and add it all, right? And you can even add all meshes that are in the scene. I tend not to do that because you might have, say, props or other things that are attached to the character that you don't necessarily need rigged in this auto rig tool, and it might confuse it. So I stick with just the shape of the character, right? So now that I've added the geometry, I can collapse that. The next step is guides. The best embed method and the default embed method is this imperfect mesh. A perfect mesh is where everything's kind of tightened and filled and perfectly aligned. The watertight mesh is just something that doesn't have holes, but the imperfect mesh I find is really perfect for most character situations. The resolution 256 will kind of work for this character size, but you could improve that by going to 512 if you have a more dense mesh. I'm going to keep it at 256 and see how it goes. Under the guide settings, I'm going to open that up, realize that this character must be Y. The Y axis must be up, and the Z axis, the plus Z must be facing me. So if you look at the axis, the coordinates here, X is to the right, Z is forward and back. So positive Z is towards me, right? And that's generally the way that we're setting up characters. If it's not that way, you're going to have to align it and freeze the transforms of the character before you start this process. Here it says I want 3 joints for the spine, 1 joint for the neck, and 1 joint for the shoulder and clavicle, and I'll point those out. I'm going to turn on hips translate because I want to have these hips that I can translate. Now I'm going to create or update, and it's going to go through the process of setting up a skeleton. Now to point this out on my character, you'll see this joint chain right here. These are just placement guides of where it's going to eventually build the skeleton. These are actually joints, and they need to be positioned so that they're in proper alignment. It's got some neat abilities to it, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to the front view, and I'm just going to press F on the keyboard so I can frame it all up. Now I'm just going to move these up and into place. I'm going to move this up. This is going to be the wrist joint, and if I open up the attribute editor, by the way, don't close that quick rig window, just keep it open. But I'm going to show this attribute editor to see what I'm selecting, and that's the left hand. So that's technically the wrist, what I need to have there. So I'm going to put that right where the wrist would bend. This is going to be the left forearm, so the elbow joint, and I'm going to just put that into place there. I'm going to try to align it as best as I possibly can where the elbow would bend. This right here is the left arm, so it's technically the shoulder joint or the top of the upper arm. And then this would be the clavicle or the shoulder, where that shoulder would be. So I'm going to move those over into place, right? And now I'm going to open up the top view, and I just want to look at it from the top view. Notice how this is forward. Well, I'm going to move it back. I'm going to move it back about where the back of the elbow would be. It doesn't have to be completely centered. I usually just put it a little slightly back, and I'm going to move this one right in the middle of the wrist. Now these I can move forward. I can put them kind of center in the arm there, and anything else that needs to be centered, right? The one thing you'll notice on this is when I build this, you're going to notice that the hand I have to build manually, but we're going to do that in a later step. So now I'm going to select all these bones. I'm going to switch back to my front view. I'm going to select all those joints, or those what they call guides. And I'm going to go ahead and choose this next user alignment of guides. So you'll see this mirror button right here. This will mirror from the right hand side to the left hand side, or it'll be the character's left side to the character's right side. But visually you can see that it's moving from this side, from my right to my left. So when I click that, you'll notice that these joints have now, or these guides have now aligned with these to mirror across. Now the other thing is, these joints I need to bring up a little bit, and these need to be down towards the hip. So I'm just going to select all those and move them down. And I'm going to select that one and move it down. So those are going to be my spine joints, right? And then these are going to be my hip joints, but I need to move this one in a little bit. I'm going to move this one out a little bit to try to get it to line up with that one pretty perfectly. And I'm going to select, let me select that, move it over just a little bit. Move that one over, try to line it up as best as I can. And then I'm going to come down here to the feet and line those up. I'm going to bring this one down a little bit. Let's see if I bring it over. So those should be in pretty good alignment. I'm going to press Q on the keyboard and then select those three. And again, I will need to mirror them across. So I mirror them and create those guides, right? Line those guides up. This one for the head, I'm going to move it up to the top. Then I'm going to move this one up just around the joint of the neck. And so I'm going to go to my, going to go to this view and went out too far, show where that neck joint is, and that's about right there. I can move it forward and down a little bit. I'm just going to have it right at the base of the head where the neck would pivot, and then this would be at the top of the head. So I can look at the alignment in terms of sort of the forward and back. Whoop. Let me grab both of those and I'll move them both forward. So I just want a little bit of a bend where the knee is going to be. And then I'm going to look at this one, and that's his right foot. So I'm going to bring this about right there, about the ankle. This one is, it's a reference or the base of the character. And then this one is going to be the left toe base. So I'm going to put it about, I can put it about right there. Now I'm going to go back to my front view, and just to make sure, I'm going to select all these joints or these guides and make sure they're mirrored across. Same thing here. If I moved any, I want to make sure I mirror them across. Just make sure that that's lined up properly, right? Now I'm going to collapse that guides, and I've already adjusted this. So I'm going to collapse that. And now I'm going to create the skeleton and rig. So you've got this number 4 skeleton and rig generation. So I'm going to open up the skeleton settings, make sure it's T-stance, mirrored behavior. We're aligning the joints across the X axis. So Z again is back and forth, X is left and right, and Y is up and down. So I want it mirrored behavior, and I want to create a skeleton and control rig. I don't need just the skeleton for this. So then I'm going to go ahead and click create and update. And what it's going to do is it's going to build the skeleton and a control rig. So I'm still going to keep this window open, but I want to point out a couple things. The first thing to point out is I'm actually looking at the skeleton here. So you can kind of see if I zoom in here, these are actual joints. Now, what has happened is because my character is set to meters, these joints aren't really, they're just showing up as like lines. They actually look like joints. Here's how I'm going to make sure that they show up properly. So I'm going to go to the root joint, and actually I'm going to come over here. I'm going to go over to the human IK panel, keep this quick rig window open, and I'm going to choose this icon right here, which means show the skeleton. Now I can turn these two off, which actually displays all the control rigs. I'm going to select the joint that's in the center of the character, right at the hips, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to go select hierarchy, and it's going to select all the joints that are connected to that, all the bones that are connected. Then I'm going to go over to the channel box, and look over where it says radius. As long as you have joints or bones that are selected, you're going to see this radius attribute. If you don't see the radius attribute, you probably don't have a skeleton selected or the bones selected. So I'm going to change that to 1, and you're going to see all of a sudden they start to look like actual joints. So if I deselect this, you can start to see they look like joints in the bones, how they're supposed to look. So again, I'm going to right click and I'm going to select hierarchy. Radius of 1 doesn't seem to be, like, it still seems pretty small, so I'll bump that up to 3. And now you can really see where the joints are and the bones in between them. And you always see like it's pointing downstream. It's pointing down the character's hierarchy. So whenever you see these joints, you get a ball, which is the joint, and then a bone, which is pointing downstream, right? So now that I have this character looking pretty good, like you can tell that I've got this joint structure set up, right? A bone structure. A couple of things about this rig tool is it didn't create any hands, which is the way that this quick rig system works. It just doesn't create hands or toes. So I can, before I complete this auto rig or this quick rig tool, I can add more joints. And here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to go to the top view and I'm going to switch to the joint tool. So if I go over to rigging, you can see there's a locator and there's joint tool, right? So I'm going to choose that. And I'm going to place one right there at the pinky, at the base of the pinky, right? And again, I'm going to set that radius to 3. Now, I want to make sure that my joints are rotated properly, right? And so I'm going to switch back out, and then I'm going to go to my perspective view, and you're going to see that this joint is all the way down here. So I'm going to hit F on the keyboard, press E on the keyboard to see how it would rotate. And you can see that it's the rotation X is downstream. It's facing down my fingers. So if I go back to this top view, you could see if I were to rotate the X, which is that red one, it would actually rotate the finger down its axis, which you really can't do. A character really can't do that, but you have that ability, right? You couldn't necessarily rotate your finger going this direction. Now, the Z is rotating back and forth in that axis, and the Y is rotating this way. So the Y would rotate this way. So I'm going to keep my axes that way. So now what I'm going to do, with that joint selected, I'm actually going to double click the create joint. I want to make sure, right now I'm just going to make sure symmetry is off. I don't want to scale compensate. I want to turn that off. And I'm going to turn off variable bone radius settings. Now, with that set, I'm going to zoom into this a little bit. Now, when I have this joint selected, if I just click here, if I just click down the finger where the first joint would be, it's going to create a new joint with that, as long as the previous one's selected. Now I'm going to click again. And now I'm going to click again. I need one at the end, so I have 2 knuckles and then an end of the fingers. Now, I'm going to press Q on the keyboard, deselect it, and now I could duplicate this, but it's easy enough to just start with a new joint, click here, and click here. And now if I mess it up and I didn't get one properly, I'm going to bring this one out first. And now I'm going to go to this one and bring that out. Get it to about where that knuckle should be. And I didn't create great geometry for this. And if I want, I can turn on wireframe on shaded. And then I can see exactly where I've created geometry. And I'm just going to put these knuckles right there where those joints should be. And it should be kind of equidistant to a certain degree. But if you pull this one down, it's going to pull everything else down. So I've got to get those set up like that. Now I'm going to go back, deselect, go back to the joint tool, click right here, and then again right here, again right here, and then one at the end. Press return. You should see the whole thing. I'm going to again go back to the joint tool, select here, click here, and this one I actually did pretty good with making these. I just didn't complete all the other ones down over here, and go to here. And now I'm going to work on the thumb. So I need to have one here. Well, let me make sure I don't have this joint selected. So press Q on the keyboard or hit return, go back to the joint tool. I'm going to put one right about right there. I'm going to put one right about right there, one here and one here. And now we're going to have to worry about the rotations of these, and I'm going to show you how to fix it. So I'm going to go ahead and close that window. And now I'm going to switch back to the perspective view, and you're going to notice that it's all the way down here on the floor, but that's okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select each one of these, and then I'm going to bring those up. Let me switch to my side view, and I'm going to line those up where the hand should be. Right? Now with this one, I'm going to have to rotate this to line it up with my thumb. So I'm going to go to my perspective view. Let's just hit F on the keyboard. Right? And I'm going to line this up so that my thumb, so the joints of the thumb go straight down the chain. Right? And I want this as straight as possible. But I'm also looking at the angle that I've created my thumb, and I want to make sure I've rotated this in that direction, and then rotate this down. Right? Now, because I want that to be straight down, I'm going to go to each one of these, and I'm going to take out any translation. I'm going to go to the next one, and I want to make sure that I don't have any rotation on that. I'm going to select this one, no rotation, and that one, no rotation. So it's just translation, right? And it's just translation in the X because it's going down the X axis, right? So I can pull it this way if I want to, and you're going to see it's got a value in the Z now. So I can change it a little bit, but I don't want to rotate it. I want to keep the orientation going straight down the thumb as I had planned, right? So I can move this if I want, and I can get this, but when you look at them, there's no other values other than translate X, which is further down the chain. So when I select the joint, the X, and if I hold down W and click and hold, I can change that to component, and you're going to see the X axis is going straight down the chain. The last one, don't worry about it too much. It's just for binding. It's not, you're not going to be able to move this. It's just, it needs a joint at the end to make a bone between the two joints. So I'm going to just hold down Shift and select each one of these joints. And actually I don't need to select, and I do not need to select the end joint. I just need to select each knuckle. And now if I press E on the keyboard and rotate, you're going to see they all fold in like they should, right? That's how that's going to work, where they all kind of fold in. And if you keep pulling, they all kind of fold in. Even the thumb is going the direction it should. So I'm going to press Z on the keyboard so that they go back to their original rotation. And that's how you can check to make sure they're going to rotate properly. So once that's done, you'll notice that I don't have them on the other side. So what I want to do is I want to mirror these joints. So, okay, so I need to make sure that I'm naming all my joints. And so this is going to be the left-hand side, right? So these are all the left, this is left pinky. So I'm just going to start it with an L underscore pinky. And I can give it base. I'm going to copy that, go to the next one, paste it in, left pinky mid, and paste that in. Left pinky. And I'm going to give it dist for distal, which is that end joint. And then on this one, I'm going to call that end. Now I'm going to do the same thing to the next one. This is the ring finger. So I'm going to just paste that in. Ring. Copy that. So I want to make sure all these are named properly. Base, I'm going to call it mid. Paste. Dist. And then this one, end. Go to the next one. That's middle finger. So mid, base. Copy that. Paste this in, call it mid. So it's going to look really weird being mid-mid, but that's the way it works. And then dist. Whoop. Not disty. And then end. Collapse that. Go to this one. Index, base, copy that again, paste, mid, paste, dist, and paste, and end. Same thing for the thumb, left, and just remember that Maya does not like spaces, so whoop, let me copy that. So you have to make sure that you're either doing underscores or just connecting them together. That's mid. This one is going to be dist. And this is end. All right, so now I've got them all named, which is kind of important to do. Now that I've got all the bones created for the fingers and the thumb, and I've named them all, I'm going to just start with this left pinky base. And what I want to do is I want to mirror it from the character's left-hand side to the character's right-hand side. So whenever I'm labeling these, I'm talking about the character's left, not my left. Because my perspective can change if I rotate the character around, right? So I want to make sure that this is the character's left hand and this is the character's right hand. So what I'm going to do, I want to make sure I'm in the rigging menu set. I'm going to go to skeleton. I'm going to go to mirror joints and go to the option box. And in this mirror joint option box, I just want to point out this mirror across X and Y. It is mirroring across the X, but the axis it's talking about is the Y and Z axis in this character. So it's going across where the Y and the Z intersect. So technically, this would be going over on the other side of the X with the Y and Z mirror across option selected, right? So also, since I've named it for the left-hand side of the character with an L underscore, I'm going to have it automatically rename these. So I'm going to type in left or L underscore for the search for and R underscore for the replace with. And so when I click apply, if I click mirror, it's going to perform that action and close the window, but I'm going to do this for every single finger. So I'm going to click, instead of mirror, I'm going to click apply, which keeps the window open, but mirrors it across. Then I'm going to do the ring finger. I don't need to change any of this and just click apply. Then the middle finger, apply, index finger, apply, and thumb, apply. And now you're going to see they've all been mirrored across, and I can close this window. Now with that closed, I can now parent these to the wrist joint. So all I have to do is select the joint, select the wrist, and press P on the keyboard. And I'm going to do the same thing. Select that, parent. select that joint, select the wrist joint, parent. Index finger, wrist, parent. Thumb, wrist, parent. Same thing over here. Starting with the pinky, then go to the wrist, parent. Ring finger, parent. Middle finger to wrist, parent. Index finger to wrist, parent. Thumb, base of the thumb, wrist, parent. And now I have them all parented. The only other thing that I want to do, I'm going to come down here to the toe or the foot, and you'll notice, and actually I'll go to the top view, you will notice that the feet are at the ball of the foot and not at the toe. So I'm going to add an additional joint for that. So I'm going to go to the joint tool, select that, and then I'm going to go just right here and select a joint like right there. And then I can make sure that that is, hold down W. I'm just going to go to object mode or world mode so I can just drag that straight out. I just want to make sure like this one is going to be straight out from that joint. So if I look at this one, its translate X is out. And if I look at this one, then I can make sure that it's aligned. However, since it's at the toe, I don't necessarily need it to be completely aligned. It's just going to be something to bind the end of the toe with, right? So I'm just going to leave it right there. And then I can do the same thing over here, but I can again, or if I want to detach it, I can hold down Shift P. I can go back up to skeleton, mirror joints, and then right now I didn't give it a name, so I'm going to give it L_toe end. And then I'm going to mirror it across. And there it is, mirrored. And now all I have to do is parent it. So same process. The child first, the parent. Press P on the keyboard. And then again, child, parent. Press P on the keyboard and it's parented, right? So now I have joints at the very end of each toe. Now, with all that selected, it seemed like it might have been a lot to create them and parent them and mirror them and do all that. But now I'm ready to complete this process in the quick rig tool. I did this step 4, created the skeleton and the rig generation, right? And let's, just to show this, I'm going to go over to the human IK. I'm going to turn off the skeleton view and I'm going to turn back on the control rig. Now, if I select each one of these, you can see where I've got controls, right? And I can move them up and down. Now, before I move on, I want to point out that there's a control rig here, but because of the size of my character, the controls are very small. So here's how you can change the size of them. I'm going to select the quick rig character control reference. If you've named your character something different, it'll say that. And I'm going to expand that. And underneath, you're going to see all these controls. Here's all the character controls. I'm going to select the top one. And I'm going to shift select the second to the bottom one, not this one that has more underneath it where it has the plus sign, but all the ones that don't. So I'm going to select all those. I'm going to come over here to the channel box and I'm going to go to where it says radius. And under radius, if I type in 1 there, you're going to see that they get larger. And then I'm going to enter, let's say I go to 5 and either tab or return to accept that, and they're getting larger. Now I can select them individually and scale them up as well, but I'm going to get these to a point where they're larger than the parts of the body that they're around. So, and here in the hips, I need this to be a bit larger. So I'm going to go and take that to 10. And actually it needs to be larger. So I'm going to change that to say 15. So I need to be able to select that outside of the character. So I'm going to keep going larger until I can see it outside of the character. So I'm going to take that, let's say to 30. And that's pretty good because now I can select it when I'm animating. When I'm animating, I can actually select it. The same thing of these rings here. So I need to select that one. And I'm going to go to about 20, go larger, go to 30. And here's how I can customize my controls. Let's say 40. Whoop. 40. Enter. And now it's around the character. I can always customize these controls, but at this point in time, I don't need to do that. So I could select, I'm going to go to 35 on this, and you'll see that has a look, and you can change that look to, you know, a circle. I can change that to a cube if I wanted to, a hard cross. I find these to be really distracting, so I just leave it as a square, or, you know, whatever makes the most sense for you. So the same thing here, I'm going to select these, and let's say I take these up to 20, right? So those are going to be the top of the hips, and I'm going to go a little bit larger. Let's go to 30 on those. So those are going to be the top of the hips. And then I've got rings for the ankle and for the ball of the foot. And I think I need this one to be bigger, so let's take that to 20 or 30. Right, so as long as I can see it outside the character. Same thing up here, I've got one for the head, and I'm just going to take that to like 15, so I can do that. Right, so now I've got these controls set up so I can kind of see them. As far as the hips goes, I don't need to necessarily make those any larger unless I really need them to be. So I'm not going to worry about those, I'm just going to worry about these IK controls. Now, if I need the FK controls, I can set up different FK controls on these joints, but right now this control structure is based on that size. So I can actually grab these and make these larger if I wanted to. Select that one, set it to 5 if I wanted to. So you can always modify this later as well. So these would be the FK controls that you can always kind of select and move, right? So that's kind of the idea there. So I can select both of these and set that to say 5, right? And these are going to be all these FK controls that I need, right? Oh, and I missed that one. So let me set that one to 5. And then this one, the clavicle up here, I can set that to 5, right? So that's the way that I can set these character controls to be larger. Okay, once I have that all set up, I can move on to this last step, and that's skinning. So I'm going to use this skinning. I'm going to make sure that I have this whole thing selected, right? And I can see the controls here, and I'm just going to go ahead and create and update the skinning using this GVB, the default settings method. So if I create an update, it's going to process this, and now I should have the ability to move my character around, and it's rigged, right? And so if I move this, this is the pivot of the arm. I can actually grab this and I can rotate that, right? There's some skinning issues here, right? And I can always change that later because it's pulling this part of that model. So I can always kind of go through and fix that later, but this one I can move the arm around and get some movement with this character, right? So that's what I'm looking for on a very basic level. And if I grab these, I should be able to go ahead and move the fingers, you'll notice, right? So I do need to make controls for these, and all I really do for the FK controls is make little rings. That'll get you started with this quick rig tool. And now that I'm done with the skinning process, I can go ahead and close that window. I don't need it anymore. I'm going to just test this really quick. And that should get you started. In another video, I'm going to talk about making controls for the FK fingers, right? So right now I'd have to select the joint and rotate that if I wanted to. But I'm going to make controls so that I can animate those controls and move the fingers. Right now, these are set so that I can, do an FK, the forward kinematics down the arm. And this is set as an IK control, so I can just move the wrist and place the arm where I need it to go. And the whole body can move with it. So that'll get you started for this auto rig. Hopefully this helps get you started on this rigging. And there's other processes that we can do to fix this up and make it work a little bit better. But that should be a good starting point for you in using the auto rig tool.